Well, take a look at him. The most dangerous and effective Negro leader in the country. That's what the FBI dubbed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is why it's no surprise that many people believe that the FBI and the government was in on his assassination. We have some rarely heard audio from the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Listen to this audio, and then you determine whether or not the FBI was surprised when they got the call that he had been shot.
We have information that King has been shot at the Lorraine. Back 10, he has been shot.
Okay, TAC 10 advising King has been shot, 604.
TAC 11, you want us to pull down?
Check TAC 11 to pull down.
Okay, TAC 11. In the area?
A signal Q.
King has been shot. Now.
All TAC units on the call, you are to form a ring around the Lorraine Hotel. You're to form a ring around the Lorraine Hotel. No one is to enter or leave.
Back 10, we have information that the shot came from a brick building directly east across, west from the Lorraine.
Okay, TAC 10 has information the shot was fired from a brick building directly across from the Lorraine on the east side, directly across from the Lorraine on the east side from a brick building, 606.
All units, that's all units, 150 advising all TAC units to seal this area off completely.
40-year-old James Earl Ray pled guilty to killing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he was sentenced to 99 years in prison. However, the last judge to sit on the bench of his retrial says he didn't do it.
In fact, I wound up being the last judge hearing the James Earl Ray matter. Did he, in fact, assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King? And had he not died and his local attorney not died in close succession, it would have been my finding that he was not the gunman. That Remington 760 Game Master they've got in the Civil Rights Museum is not the murder weapon. It's not even close. And it was a two-man hit team that killed him from the fire station dormitory. It wasn't the flop house, and it wasn't in those bushes. So, yeah, I got into the deep details of Dr. King, and that 3 or 4 year period that case was kicking around in front of me. It's interesting, the homicide file for the Memphis Police Department reaches the same conclusion back in 1968. They entered their file in protest to the DA's office. Their conclusion was Ray is not the gunman. He was not even in Memphis that day. We know conclusively where he was. Well, he didn't get convicted. He pled guilty. You have to understand, though, the news media puts it out as he was the self-confessed killer of King. That's not true. All through the transcripts, the entirety of the record, he never confessed, and often he said, I never said I killed King. I didn't kill him. I'm pleading cause of Alford. That's A-L-F-O-R-D. It's a moderately old U.S. Supreme Court case, and it says, even if you are not actually guilty and you are pristinely innocent, you may plead guilty to the charge if you think that doing so is in your best interest under all of the circumstances as you know them to be, and you're doing so freely, voluntarily, understandingly, knowingly, advisedly, and intelligently. So Ray had gone through all of these and had lost, but there was something that came up. Modern scientific methodology took away one further necessary element. All of these things had to be there, and the state had to have a reasonable factual basis upon which to proceed otherwise. The thing the state relied upon was the rifle, but modern scientific methodology excluded that rifle from being the murder weapon. The bullet they pull out of King's body has a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 11 1/4 inches. The rifle that Ray had a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 10 inches and a bad manufacturing defect that is not apparent on the death slug. He was shot with an XM-21. It's a 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO caliber weapon with a special stainless steel barrel, a 3-9 telescopic sight modified by a company known as Leatherwood. It was a Redfield sight, and they used special subsonic ammunition with a suppressor on the end to reduce the velocity of the bullet to below supersonic to confuse the sound signature. The shot came from the dormitory in the fire station through a window that had been slightly parted. They were several feet inside. It was a two-man team, a spotter and a shooter. That's what he got killed by. If you shoot somebody at that close a range, which was about 50, 60 yards, with a .30 caliber rifle anywhere in the torso, if the individual is standing next to an emergency room, it's a non-survivable wound. But what they did is they took a head shot they almost missed because the bullet was reduced in velocity. It hit King on the right cheek, took out some molars, wrecked his tongue, came out between his jaws, left the body, hit his clavicle, ricocheted under the skin that covered the clavicle, nicked his carotid artery, went over his right shoulder, down across the back and lodged between the left scapula and his back skin. And the bullet never penetrated his thorax. Now that sounds a little weird, but it's not uncommon. So he bled out from the nicked carotid artery, and they almost missed the shot. And Ray was nowhere around. It would have been close. He had another involvement in this whole thing, and that was that he was a willing part of what amounted to a conspiracy. He was one of about 4 or 5 alternative scapegoats, and they picked him for a number of reasons. I did talk to a Captain Tommy Smith, who retired as head of homicide for the Memphis Police Department, who was the first detective on the scene. He said the shot couldn't have been from the flop house because there was a window that he was supposed to have fired the shot out of, and who told me that I never found out. He said, but there was a limb about this thick growing diagonally through the window, and you couldn't even see the Lorraine Motel from that location. He said, I came back with crime scene in about an hour, and the whole tree had been cut down, and I found out there was a cut down order sent out to the sanitation department early that day, but they were on strike, so they weren't going to cut it down.
James Earl Ray, who was convicted of killing Dr. King, why have you said before you believe he didn't act alone?
He didn't have the money, the motive, or the organization skills to do it. A lone killer getting out of town at 6 o'clock, getting into Mississippi and all that, ended up in London. He couldn't have done that by himself.
What do you think happened?
The government was very involved.
You think so? To what extent do you think J. Edgar Hoover played a role in...
I have no idea. That gets into too much detail, man, except I know this guy couldn't do it by himself. And there was a very public hatred for Dr. King expressed by the FBI and the government. So when we look at Dr. King's work, we say evidence that he changed the law and changed the culture and changed our sense of self-belief. When we fall down, we get back up again because the ground is no place for champions. So champions keep fighting.